Okay, so I'm recording this video or the screen. If you want to view what's on my screen on your screen, we can do the WebEx thing. I'll show you where that's at, and then I'm also going to show you where to put the files in case you haven't done that yet. So they're both close to the same spot. So again, down here in the bottom corner, or you can just open any sort of Windows file explorer here. Any of these, type //etsu-e3. This doesn't work in Internet Explorer or Edge or whatever it's called. But the Windows Explorer, like the browser window or the file manager window here thing, we can go to there. So //etsu-e3. That'll become very familiar to you if it's not already. So faculty, and then I am Greg. So if you're wanting to do, if you're wanting to watch on the WebEx right now, drag this into a browser window. Has anybody tried opening it in Edge? Does it work okay in Edge as well? It does. All right, so double clicking works fine. I know older versions of like Internet Explorer and maybe even Edge, like it would give you some issues with it, but it seems like it'll probably work in any browser now. So you can double click that or drag it into your preferred browser and get to log in and see what's basically going on my screen here. What we're going to do today is a little more sort of step-by-step complicated. So having this open is kind of a nice time saver, so you can kind of just do like quick eye darts over to watch without having to like look up and try to refocus on what's on my screen up here. So you all put your bridge together. Let's go ahead and put that file in the Dropbox up here. So POA, Dropbox, and then EX1 bridge. And you'll see that people have made folders with their names in it, or names on it. So if you haven't done this yet, go ahead and make your own folder with your own name. And then just because there's a lot of files in there, just go ahead and drag the maya.mb file into that folder, and that way we can save a little bit of space up there. Now, in the past, or really I'm just looking for evidence that you did this. So if you also have a render or a screenshot and would rather turn that in, I'm okay with that. I didn't really want to go too much into rendering or how to capture a screenshot because I would have rather you just focus on Maya. But in the future, a lot of the stuff you'll be turning in will be images or videos rather than actual Maya files. So yeah, I'll give you a few minutes to do that. So just as long as they're in there by the end of class today, that's cool. If you're having trouble getting yours to open because of that 2017 issue, look at the file size. I'm going to double click on somebody's here. If this is in the this one's 169 kilobytes or 265 kilobytes, that's pretty realistic. Like that's probably about the right size. If it's 1 kilobyte, something may have went wrong and you may have an actual corrupted file. If it's like a gigabyte or something, I don't know what you did. It's possible to get Maya files that are that big, but they have to have a whole lot going on in them. And so right now, most of your files are going to be under a megabyte or around a megabyte or so. So that's one of the ways you can look at it. If it's that, then it will probably open on 2018. Go ahead and plop it up there. If I get that error, I'll understand that it's probably not your fault. It's probably something to do with the computer, and I'm not going to sweat that too much. You'll still get credit for that. So go ahead and drop those in there, and we're going to start on exercise 2 for today. So exercise 2 is going to be us kind of working along together, right? We're gonna do exercise 2 pretty much in class together. You may want to spend a little time outside of class sort of polishing it up, but so because of that, you can build off of this file you've already started. Now you don't have to. We can always put this back together later, or we can import this into a new file. But for right now, I'm going to go ahead and open up that project that I downloaded, right? The bridge. So open scene, and I'm going to set my project. I always open it this way. I either go File, Open Scene, and then set my project, or you can go File, Set Project, and then set this to your new location, and then open your scene. However, what a lot of people do is just double click on their MB file. That's the wrong way to do it. That's going to break a lot of stuff, and it's probably, again, probably the issue I have to deal with more than anything else in this class. Oh, okay. So we're going to cancel on this one. So, choose the red folder. And that please work Maya.bat. Okay, so if you're having trouble getting Maya open, you may have to use that please work Maya.bat file that's up on the network.
Since my file won't work on this Maya, could I put what we're doing today in a different one and put it in the other one? So what we're doing today, can I do it in one Maya?
And then like merge them together? Yes. That'll work. It took me a second to like figure out what you were saying. So is yours the 2017 version?
Yeah, because the one I was using was 2018.
Okay, and this one over is 2017. Hopefully they'll all be 2018 soon. Actually, I like 2018 a little bit better than 2017. But yeah, they should work. What you'll do is it'll probably be easier to take your other file and import it into this. But it's just file import, and you can sort of merge files. Okay. So we're going to set our project. Again, what a lot of people have a tendency to do is just double click on their Maya file. And what that does is it does open the file successfully, but it does that with your project set here in your documents folder, right? There's like a default Maya folder in here, and it sets your project there, which means if you create any textures, if you make any renders or whatever, it's going to put them there. It's going to look for them there. And so that's not what you want because that connection is very sort of tenuous, right? If like Maya's using a texture reference, an image you have as a texture, right? Let's say you take a picture of some brick, you want to use that as a texture on your wall, right? You put that in the folder. That folder has a very specific path, right? It's like C:documents / blobbity blobbity blah blah, right? But it's a very specific set of, a very specific path. When you move to another computer, that path is different, right? Now, if you take that file on your jump drive, you move it to a different computer, here your jump drive may be your F drive, or on another computer it may be your J drive or something like that. And that means your textures are going to not show up. And sometimes your file is just going to corrupt so totally that it will never open again, right? This has happened multiple times in multiple classes. So don't double click on the file. What you need to do is set your project and then go to File, Open. Having said that, I still get it. If you're just needing to open it really quick to look at it or something, I get it. Double click on it. It'll probably be okay. Don't work on it for long periods of time like that because you're just going to make connections that mean when you get to that final time ready to render, you're going to hit render and nothing is going to work and you're not going to get your project done and you're not going to be able to turn it in on time. So, again, set project, and then we're going to choose the location of our project. Now, I thought I'd put mine here. Yeah, there it is, bridge. So I'm going to select bridge and hit set. And what that means is now Maya is going to look for everything that we're working on today in that bridge folder. Okay? Everything you save needs to be inside that bridge folder. Don't save your Maya file right outside of the bridge folder. Save it inside of that bridge folder. In any of those folders will be fine. I usually put mine in scenes. So we're going to go File, Open Scene. And I'm going to go ahead and choose one of these. In all honesty, I don't remember which one's which. Let's try Bridge Constructed 05. This may have everything in it. Yeah. So this is what we're targeting today. This is what we're going to end up with by the end of the day. Okay? So if I hit play on this, these cars start animating. They're animating way too fast. The way we change that is right-click on playback speed, set that to real time. And so you'll get to see what we're going to have by the end of class today. Okay? So let me go ahead and open one of these other versions here. Try to find one that doesn't have cars in it. There we go. So this is probably what most of you have, right? Some variation of this. Again, I'm not going to nitpick this too much. This was mainly an exercise in moving objects around, tumbling around in the screen, getting your camera to the right location. So let me ask you, what was the hardest part of this for you?
A little squeaky.
Maya's not free.
On the bottom.
The little, like the little, like,
Little thump, 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 thump.
these things here?
Yeah.
Yeah, getting all of those evenly spaced. Did anybody find any tricks to that?
I mean,
No.
Using the X viewfinder and just the different axes viewers to line everything up.
So like using the grid, like you just sort of line up
No,
that.
like when you hit space and you have the flat view plane instead of the.
Oh, the orthographic views. Yeah, so if you do that, you can kind of see the spacing a little bit.
I know I broke Maya at one point. So like you hit space bar and you have like top, perspective, and the two other views. My two top ones were top and top.
So I'll show you how you probably did that.
It
Is
was
you
a
probably hit the space bar and then click and then drag sideways to top view.
Oh.
So that's another thing you can do is you can switch your views here. Another way you can do that is if you go to panels, you can choose either your perspective camera or your orthographic camera, and it will change it to one of those others too. So
I
you do
did
it.
view
Yeah.
something, and it made like a really glitchy perspective. So
Yeah,
everything was like fading it, and it was.
yeah. It's I get you. And that's so. What's some other things you struggled with? Yes.
I used the mash node. I made all the ones in the middle, like a mash network, and then I used distribute.
So it was evenly spaced.
Yeah.
Ooh, that's.
Move it, so I just moved everything else around.
That's a smart move. That's something we'll get into like way later. But Mash is a way to sort of use math or sort of simplified functions to make things move or to place them in different locations. So Mash is called procedural animation. We'll talk about that a little bit more in animation fundamentals. Here's something you can look at, like this one here versus this one here. You'll notice that on the numbers here, translate Z is 20. And here, translate Z is 22. So apparently each of those are about 2 units apart. So that's another way you could have made it a little more specific. It's a little time consuming placing every one of those, right? But you could have done that just by sort of sticking to some whole numbers and like looking at that. Yes?
Are the ones closer to the large vertical poles that hold the ropes? Are those closer? Because if you do two, like,
Yeah, there's a little bit of a gap there. Yeah.
there's 38 poles.
Yeah, so they're not all perfectly like spaced. So this one's like 2. That means this would probably be about 5, and then this would be about 8. So, and it's not that you had to like figure out those numbers specifically. Sometimes it's just trying to think around this problem. Like there's a lot of navigation related problems. There's a lot of like how do I get this to line up all in the same axis. So some of you may have like, if you looked at this from the top view, right, like getting that to line up perfectly. Well, one of the things you might recognize is right here, all of mine are set to 2.334. So if I selected multiple pieces of this and set them all to 3, well, actually they're all set to 0 on the side, my bad. So let's try that again. So we all set that to 1, right? They're all going to stay lined up. Right? So we can select multiple objects and type in a number there, and they'll all move together to that new location. So some of this is just practice, right? I could sit here all day long and spout out a whole bunch of different tidbits and tips and tricks and all these different things. Some of it is like you'll not remember that until you need it, right? And then when you need it, you'll try it, you'll figure it out, and that'll stick with you forever. That process is just called learning, right? That's how this works. So hopefully you all have something close. Again, I'm not going to be too hardcore about exactness, like about being very precise and exactly the way that I have it on mine. If you have something that looks like a bridge, you got full credit. Good job, right? So let me ask you this: how many of you enjoyed it? You're like I saw 2 hands go up. All right. It's gonna be that class.
It's not fun, but it's interesting.
It's not fun, but it's interesting. That's an interesting comment. So what is why is it interesting?
Huh?
Why do you feel like it's interesting?
It's just like you're getting to put together, like you're getting to build something, but not physically build it.
Yeah.
Like it's not in front of you.
It's like virtual Legos.
Yeah.
Yeah.
But hard and a pain in the butt.
Yeah.
That's very true.
Yeah, it's like, I get you. It's like doing Legos with chopsticks or something like that.
Yeah.
So this will become easier. Like what we practiced yesterday, moving stuff around, moving your camera around, all of this will become easier the more you do it. So be patient with it. This is, like I said, this is not the type of software that you spend 5 hours with and you're a master of it, right? Like this is something that I've been using literally for, I don't know, like 15 years, 17 years, something like that. And there's still things I learn every day in this program, right? So yeah. Do you have a question on that, or are you just stretching?
So like when I was moving my stuff, a lot of times I would press the 2 key and it would like fade it out.
The 2 key.
Yeah.
Thanks for bringing that up. That's a good one, actually. So let's try that. If I select this box, right, it looks like a box. You can't really see that it's highlighted, but I have this closest one selected, right? If you have yours open, try pressing the 2 key and see what happens.
Wait, what?
What did you do?
I pressed 2.
No.
Exactly.
How do you go back?
Control Z.
I did it.
So Control Z would undo it, but we actually haven't done anything to this. What we've done is we've changed the way we're viewing it. If you hit 1, it'll go back to a box, right? So what this is called smooth preview. Okay? So we'll talk about this here in just a few minutes. But 1 is going to be showing us exactly what the real polygons look like. 2 shows us a little bit of both. You see a smooth version in the middle, and then you see the original polygon shape outside of it. And then 3 just shows it to us completely smooth. It's all the... Huh?
4
Yeah.
screws it up.
So if we hit 4... What just happened?
How do I go back?
So don't worry, we haven't messed anything. We haven't changed anything. All we're doing is changing the render setting, the way that we're seeing it in our viewport. So 4 shows it to us wireframe.
I made it worse. I clicked on 3.
Okay, you're right.
She's
Fi-
writing everything.
5 shows it to us shaded. If we had textures on this, we could hit 6 and see the textures on it. And 7, 7 is lit. And so apparently we have some lights in here. 7 is lit. So 7 means it has the lighting in it. If you don't have any lights in your scene, this will just show up as like a black silhouette, right? So to fix all this again, 1 is regular, 2 is smooth shaded, or is a smooth preview and regular at the same time, and then 3 is smooth. So to get that back, you just have to have it selected and hit 1. Oh goodness, what did I hit? If you hit F1, that comes up. I accidentally hit that.
Oh.
So this is the help. This is the help I mentioned earlier. So yeah, we just hit 1, and it takes it back to normal. So this will become very useful later when you're trying to make a really smooth organic shape, and all you're getting out of Maya is a bunch of boxes, right? We can sort of smooth that and get a little bit more of a refined shape. Yes.
My other question is like,
I feel like I'm being able to let something happen. That's my good mind. Just hope for the best. Cry a little bit.
Say it one more time.
say for instance, if you put 2 shapes in the same slot,
Yeah.
one covers the other, right? Because they look identical.
Yes.
But you don't realize it. How do you find all the shapes that are at the top?
So that's a good question. I love this. Y'all are actually teaching the things I'm wanting to teach by asking the right questions. so the question was, like right now, let's sort of move this out so we can see where it's at, right? So I'll move this over to, let's say 10. Let's do 3 and 20, right? So if I were to move this object over to those same exact locations, like they're on top of each other, right? So if I did 10, 3, and 20, right? It looks like there's just one object there. They're both still there, and it becomes very frustrating to try to pick objects that are on top of each other. So the first thing to recognize is that Maya isn't actually drawing or creating volumetric shapes, right? Like you as a human being, right, are not an empty bag of skin, right? You have volume all the way through you, right? And this object does not. This object is just a shell of something, right? So we can clash these things together. We're not going to get any sort of real-time physics of them bumping into each other. We're able to overlap things, and that can be good and bad. But the problem now is they're both taking up the same exact space, and if you wanted to select one of them specifically, I don't know which one I selected, right? So let me show you a new menu, or a new view, a new thing that is in here. It's not new, it's new to you, that will allow you to pick and find any of these objects, okay? So there's two different ways we can find this. We can go to Windows, we can go to Outliner, okay? And that's going to open it up. Why? I have no idea why it opened it up over there. That is the last place I would ever want it. I usually keep mine over here, right? So that's one way we can get it. The other way we can get it is we can click this little button right here. See it? And that'll pop open the outliner. And so the outliner is kind of like the file explorer in Windows or any other file structure, right? This will tell us every object that is inside of our scene, right? So you see all of these P cube 25, 24, 23, 22. All of those things each of those are a different model. And the P stands for polygon, so it's polygon cube 20, polygon cube 19. That is a really bad naming structure, right? And so some of the things that you can do in this, that is one of the reasons this is beneficial, is I can double click on these things and rename them. So let's see, P cube 15, the one I have there, right? So if I had this named as like concrete, I can't, yeah, let's just try road. That makes more sense. Road. We'll name that road 1, right? Then I could go in here and click road 1 and select it and move it. And I can see that that one would be road 2, right? And so that means we can pick these things based off of their name. There's some really cool things we're going to get into this later because this does work just like a folder structure. I can actually put road 2 underneath road 1, and it's like putting something into a folder. And so if I moved road 1, road 2 would go with it. All right, so we're gonna talk about that here in a little bit. That is sort of the basics of what we call rigging. And rigging is how you prepare something for animation. Okay, so that's a lot of stuff. Any other questions? This is good stuff. Anything you ran into difficult? Anything you're enjoying about this? I'm dragging you through this.
Well, the finished product was like, oh, look, I did it. Was it worth it? No.
Okay.
I did it. Feeling of accomplishment.
Fair enough. That's all right. So hopefully, like the finished product is why we do all this, right? It's not, I mean, learning to draw isn't easy either, but a lot of you invest a lot of time because you want to get a nice drawing out of it, right? Or be able to do a nice drawing. So I'm going to undo. So undo, for those of you who, I don't remember if I said this last time or not, Control Z is undo in nearly every program that exists. And so we have a limited number of undos in Maya, but if we just keep hitting Control Z, eventually it'll go back to the point that we were. Yes?
What's redo? Like if you click Control Z too many times.
I think it's Control Y. I can never remember the exact shortcut key, but one of the ways we can see is Edit. Yeah, so redo is Control Y. And there's also this little undo and redo buttons right here in the top corner too, next to the save button. So yeah, Control Y will redo it. Interestingly, I think in Maya, I can't promise this. I know for a long time in Maya, just Z was undo. So that may undo still yet as well for you. But all of the other software uses Control Z, so you'll get in the habit of just using that. All right. So you all have something pretty close to this, right? We have a road. Oh, let me go ahead and hit. That's what it looks like without a light in the scene when we hit the lit view.
This looks like a bad video game right now.
So it is actually. That is exactly what is happening. So, and that leads us into a very good.
Segue.
There you go. A good segue into something that we can look at, right? So this is not very pretty, right? This is a video game. It is using your graphics card, your GPU renderer, to show us a shaded or textured, real-time interactive 3D environment, right? That's all a video game is doing too. The video game happens to have much more interesting looking objects or models or whatever in it. But we're doing the same thing here, right? We're interacting in a 3D space with all of these objects. And even though it doesn't look great right now, this viewport is actually a pretty powerful renderer. We can do a lot of stuff with lighting in here. It's not going to render as nice as like Unreal or something like that. But there are things we can do in here that gets incredible looking renders out of this, and we'll talk about it later. So I keep using the word render. What am I talking about there? What is a render? Making the animation play. No, that's more of the. I mean, it kind of is. If we render a whole bunch of images, we can put that together as an animation. Huh?
The final product.
So it's the final product, right? And we use that phrase in a lot of different contexts, right? You can do a render with a pencil, right? You can render your illustration, right? You can render fat, right? Like that's how you get fat out of like meat and stuff. Is you have to get it out of it. And so really, when we use the word render, what we're actually doing is we're taking all of this math that Maya has inside of here, and some of that includes lighting, and some of that includes texturing, and some of that includes the objects that we built, and some of that includes animation. We're taking all of those mathematical numbers, and we're telling Maya to like crunch all of those numbers and give us a pretty picture out of this, right? So what we're seeing in our viewport right now is a render. It's just not a really good one, right? Here's the interesting thing. How many of you have watched like the behind the scenes on some of the Pixar movies and stuff like that? Right? And they always say this phrase of like, if they have to render each of the images for an animation, and they'll say something like, to give you a little bit of back story on this, an animation has 24 images in it, right? It's 24 images that flash really fast at your face. That's film, right? And in a game, it's maybe 30 or 60. On TV, it's 29.97, almost 30, right? And they flash those images really fast, and they flash it so fast that it just looks like motion does, right? And so in those Pixar's behind the scenes, they'll say something like, each rendered image took 24 hours to render, and if we were rendering this entire movie on one computer, it would have taken 60 years to render Finding Dory or whatever, right? And that's an interesting little like note, like I guess. But what I need you to realize is they said it took 24 hours to render one image. What is happening right now in our viewport is Maya is rendering this in real time at least 30 frames a second, right? Whenever we move around, it's updating this entire render of this bridge in real time. So is your video game, right? Your video game doesn't take 24 hours to render one image, right? It's rendering them 30 images in a second, sometimes 60 images in a second. Actually, 60 is becoming more of the standard in games. And so that means that when things get really complicated, your computer isn't fast enough to render them at real time, right? And that's why video games are slightly more simplified in some of the detail of the models or some of the effects or the lighting, is because it has to be able to render it in real time.
So what you're telling me is that Pixar needs more powerful computers.
More, actually, so here's the interesting thing. That's a GPU renderer, right? When you're rendering it, or when you're rendering your video game, you're using your graphics card to render in real time, right? And again, that's what we're doing in our viewport here. And that has limitations, but if you don't have to interact with something in real time, then you can take a little bit longer and you can do some more complicated calculations, right? Those types of renders are called software renders. Okay? So that means there's a different software package that is crunching all of those numbers and giving you a better render. Okay? So there's two different, we can either see a hardware render or a software render. The way we actually see a final render, though, is to click this little clapboard up here. So you see this section here, we have 4 little clapboards. There's this first one with the eyeball on it. We're going to click the one that's just empty. It's just an empty clapboard. And this says render current frame. So I'm going to click that. Much better. Not really. I like that. Like this is the default render engine that Maya has always had. It's called Maya Software Renderer. Okay, it's going to render really fast, but it's not really going to be that great. We can put some more complicated lights in here. We can put some textures in here, and it will look better than what we're seeing in our viewport. But it's not going to give us more of the complicated lighting that we get in the real world, right? So I want to show you a couple of other things that we can do in here. So we have all of these other renderers, right? But the one I'm going to do is Arnold. So if I go down here and click this Arnold renderer and hit render, look at that, it's beautiful, right? So why can't I see anything? There's no lights in this scene, right? So yes, you may have a light in your scene, depending on which one you opened. Did you change it to the Arnold renderer? So, some of the files that were up there had had a directional light on it. Yeah, so you see over there and here that directional light. Yeah, right there. So if you can see something on yours, it's because I may have left a directional light in the scene. That's cool. You can leave that in there. We're actually going to create a new light in here just so you can see why this is a more powerful renderer.
It does look better.
Huh?
I said it does look better.
It does look better, yeah, right? So what we're going to do is I'm going to put a new light in here. Now there's a whole bunch of different lights. If we go to create, let's see all of these lights over here. I'm not actually going to use any of those. These are the ones that work well with Maya software. But Arnold is a separate software package that Maya has kind of acquired or licensed. And so there's a separate Arnold tab here, right? And if I click Arnold, lights, I'm just going to choose an area light. You'll see that it created a light down here on the ground, right? So I can move this up and sort of reposition this. And let's see what happens when I render now. If I go to this render button. Hey, Arn. So you can't see it very well, but it's starting to show some stuff. I need to crank up the intensity of this light. Okay. So if I select this light, there's some features over here. But if I go to my attribute editor and open that up, we're going to see a lot more information about our light, okay? Including the intensity and the exposure. Both of those are values that we can change, so that will make this light brighter. So intensity is one. I'm going to actually crank up my exposure. But one of the things we can sometimes do that will help is just to uncheck normalize. So if I uncheck normalize, we're going to get a little bit of something more, right? So we're starting to get some light in there. Again, I'm going to turn up my exposure to something like maybe 2. I don't know why that's so gray looking up there. So 2, and I hit render. There we go. So now we're starting to get some light, right? Let's crank this up even. Oh, something else I'll show you is this is an area light, so it's sort of dependent on the shape of the light. So that means I can scale this up and make it bigger, and that will also change the way my lighting is looking. Stuff like that's looking a little big. Yes.
How do you know where your light is pointing? Is it just like a ball of light?
So in this type of light, it's the direction of that arrow. Okay, so think of it as like a if you had a giant fluorescent light that's like a square shape, right? It's that, but it's pointing in the direction of the straight line, right? So the box is what is, or the square that is over there is what's casting light, and it's casting it in the direction of that line, right? So I'll go ahead and turn that, or I'm going to go ahead and pull that back just a little bit so we can light up the rest of the scene. Sorry, let me get a slightly better angle on this so you can see it better. Okay, so I want to talk just a minute about lighting. We're going to get into using and lighting things a lot more over the next in the next few classes here. But today I want to just sort of talk about why this is impressive that we're able to get this image out of here, right? Maya software boils light down to a very simple mathematical process, right? It thinks of it like a pellet gun, right? So your light shoots a pellet of light into your scene. If it strikes something, it renders it as brighter, right? And that's it. It's done. If it hits something and there's an object behind it, you can make it cast a shadow, but it doesn't always. Sometimes it'll hit an object, go through, and light the thing behind it. And that, for the basics of Maya, when this first came out back in the 90s, that was enough, right? We were impressed that we were actually getting images on the screen, right? That's not how light really works. Actually, light is super, super complicated to the point that nobody really understands everything about light. In some instances, light acts like a particle, and in other instances, it acts like a wave. Like if you look into some of the physics of light and start getting into quantum physics, the pinhole experiment shows that if you make 2 holes in a box and fire individual light particles at it, it'll go through both holes at the same time. Like it's breaking every law of physics that we know. So calculating light as just like I shot a pellet gun at a thing and it bounced off, right? That's not really how it works, right? Think of this, these back corners of the wall here, right? I'm not shining a spotlight on any of that. This light is coming through this window. It's striking the wall. It's bouncing off at an angle. It's taking some of that color information with it. And it's bouncing around this room as if it's a little packet of energy, right? And every time it hits something, it loses a part of that energy to it, takes something else with it. It really doesn't take anything else with it. It's actually the absence of that color particle is what's carrying it with it. And eventually bounces all over into this room until we get illumination. But you'll see that like the light sort of falls off at a gradient into the corners, and that's just like the way things bounce. Yes?
It sounds like the way you describe that made me think that it's less of a wave, or it sounds very similar to how gases work.
Yeah, it's really weird because it also has other properties of properties like a wave, like the way if you drop a stone into water, the way you get that ripple. You can see similar effects to that on light. So, what were we going to say?
Did they get any new theories into that?
Oh, there's like if you look into quantum theory and string physics, I geek out on that stuff a little bit. I don't always understand the math, but there's some really cool stuff in there.
Like, man, that's crazy.
Yeah. Oh no. Like start digging into it. It will blow your mind. Like the you all have heard of like Schrodinger's cat. Like that's where that comes from. It's basically
I was both dead and alive.
Yeah, basically that comes from the pinhole experiment, because one of the interpretations of that. I'm getting on. I'm going on a tangent. I'll back. Look up the Copenhagen interpretation of the. Yes.
It says I can't use the Arnold renderer.
Okay. Let me see why, but there's a few of you may not even have the Arnold renderer on your computer.
I feel like it's missing a title or something.
Not everything.
Especially whenever it's out in the daylight. That's like how it shows outside when they're rabbit.
So for some of you, you may not have Arnold on your computer. Well, you do. It's just not showing up in Maya. So if you do not have the word Arnold up here in your menu, that's okay. I'll show you how to get it there. Arnold is a plugin. It's actually a separate software package that you can have in a whole bunch of different animation packages. To turn on that plugin, we'll have to go into Maya's settings. So we go to Windows, Settings and Preferences, Plugin Manager, and we're going to scroll way down here, close to the bottom. You'll see one that says MTOA. Right? So that's what that stands for is Maya to Arnold. And what it means is Maya has this model. It has to export it to Arnold to render. And it just does that in real time on our viewport here. But this is the plugin that allows Maya's files to render in Arnold, right? So when you turn that on, you'll get all of the Arnold menus and be able to use that. There's also some really nice Arnold shaders that we'll learn about in a little while here. So, all right. So, again, we can play around with this light quite a bit. We can continue to crank up the intensity. We can play with the size. We can make multiple lights. There's a really neat feature we have where we can create a sky dome. Creates like a sphere all the way around our object. And then we can put an image on the inside of that sky dome and have the image cast light based off of the colors on the image. So, yes?
Could you review how you brought up that light menu?
So, yes, this one down here on the side. So that's a pretty good thing because this is actually something that is not just for the light. Okay, so down the side of our, I wish I had a laser pointer. So down the side of Maya right here, you'll see a couple of different tabs. You see this one that says Channel Box and Layer Editor. You may see one that says Modeling Toolkit. You may see one that says Attribute Editor. By default, we're usually in the Channel Box. But what I was looking at was the Attribute Editor. Okay. And so this will change depending on which object you have selected. So I selected my light, and I'm changing the attributes for my light. If I select my plane here, you'll see a whole bunch of different things that I can change about that. And we're going to talk about that a little bit more as we go. Yes?
I'm sorry if I may have missed this, but is there certain lights you should use for certain things?
So for Arnold, it's better to use the lights that are listed under the Arnold tab. Some of the default lights that are in Maya over here in Create, some of these lights will work with Arnold, but not all of them. So the Arnold lights, just you get better results with it. So I show you these two things because eventually this is how we're going to get a final animation, right? We're going to start making a car here in a minute, and after we create that car, we're going to want to move that car, and then we're going to want to render every one of those images so we can turn it into a video, right? Just like Pixar are rendering out all of those images, like we're going to do the same thing. Ours shouldn't take 24 hours a frame, but it may take a while. Like to render a 5-10 second video may take you 8 to 10 hours. It may even take more than that depending on the settings, right? So it's really just a matter of how nice you want it to look, right? And you want it to look really nice. So I'm going to teach you how to do that. But the problem with that is like it requires a little bit of time management, right? You have to be prepared to be done a little early so you can start rendering. And then once you're done with your render, you'll see something that like didn't work right. And you're like, and you'll fix it and render again. Like that's just sort of the world we live in. That's how this process works. We do have what's called a render farm here. I don't know if it's fully functional yet, but technically you're kind of sitting at the render farm. All of these computers, like when you log off of them and go get dinner or whatever, it's just sitting here eating electricity, right? Like it's not being functional at all. It's not doing anybody's math homework. It's just sitting there like gobbling up electricity. What a render farm does is it takes any idle computers in the room and has them render for you while people aren't using them, right? We also have a whole, if you go down to 195, it's on the first floor of the lab all the way at the end, that we have 4 racks of old computers. So like I think it's pushing around 50 or 60 computers that are just like pretty much stacked up against the wall for nothing but rendering, right? I'll show you how to submit stuff to the render farm. It's not easy, but you have to be very conscientious of that whole set project thing because that's one of the things that'll cause the render farm to not work. It doesn't mean you have to. A lot of times you can, like I said, you can do that. You can be rendering on one computer while you're writing your English paper or whatever. And like there's been plenty of students who have graduated from here and never used the render farm. But that is a tool that I'll show you how to use as we get a little closer to that date. So, right now, we have this giant bridge and nothing to drive across it, right? I want to drive something across this thing. So I'm going to build a very simplified car, right? This is going to take us a little bit more into modeling again. What time does this class get out? 4:45. Okay, we're doing good. We're doing good.
You have like 45 minutes.
Yeah, I'll get most of it done. So, this is cool though. If we have to put it off and pick up on Monday, that's fine. But I think we can get this. So the first thing is I want to model a car, but right now I have a giant bridge in the way. Right? I need to put that bridge somewhere else or hide that bridge in some way so I can start working on my car. So I can do wireframe. I could hit 4 and put it to wireframe, but really what I'd rather do is just hide it, right? Like let it still be there, just make it invisible. So if we go back to our channel box and layer editor here down the side, again, if these tabs are not showing up for you, there's buttons along the top here, these 5 buttons. Some of them turn that on, right? So this is the modeling toolkit. This is the attribute editor. This is the channel box. So all of these buttons will make these panels on the side show up. So I'm going to go to my channel box, open that up. And so earlier we saw if we selected this object, we have these values here, and we can make some changes to it. But down here at the bottom, this little bottom corner down here, this is our layers. Right? This is our layer area. Right? Currently we don't have any layers. And what I'm going to do is I'm going to select all of my bridge. So I'm just going to drag select over the whole thing. And then I'm going to hit this button here in the corner. It's a little white plane with a sphere on top of it. And that's going to create a new layer and put all of the objects I have selected in that layer. Now, if you make that layer and don't select the objects, like it will still make a layer, it just won't put them in there. I can show you how to put those in there in a second. But what we have now is this layer 1. Yes?
Can you select, then go to layers and say make layers from selected?
Yeah, this one right here, yeah. Create a new layer or...
Can you click on layers with, like...
Oh, here.
Yeah.
Yeah, create layer from selected. Yeah, I think that'll do the same thing as that button. And so how you can tell if that's actually in the layer 1 here is you see this little V on the end. If I click that, it hides it. That's the visibility of everything in that layer. So I can turn everything in that layer on and off and kind of get it out of my way, right? I want to differentiate between these layers and the layers that you might have experienced in like Photoshop or something like that. These have nothing to do with what is on top of each other in like any order, right? It's not like if you put all of the layers from layer 2 above it, they're going to render on top of the others. This is just for organizational purposes. Think of this more as like folders for keeping track of stuff, right? And so I'm going to go ahead and you can double click on the word layer, and I'm going to go ahead and name that bridge layer. It won't accept any spaces, so you got to name it carefully. And so now I know that that's there. Now here's something else I want to show you. Sometimes you still want to be able to see it. You just don't want to be able to select it, right? Let's say you have some other object you're trying to select, and every time you try to select it, you select that instead. And you're like, it's driving me nuts. What you do is this empty box over here, there's 3 boxes. One says V, one says P. That just means it's going to be visible in playback if you hit the play button. But this empty one, if I click on it, it's going to make the whole thing wireframe, and I can't select it. Okay, so it still exists. I just won't automatically select it or accidentally select it. And if I click that T one more time, it has an R. That means it's locked. R actually stands for referencing, but you'll see that it's here, completely visible, looks exactly the same. I just am not able to select it, right? So I have all that stuff. I want to go ahead and just close my bridge just so I can have a clean workspace to work again, right? Okay, I'm going to make a car. I'm going to make it relatively quickly, but I'm not super quickly. And it's going to be a very simple car, right? Because you're welcome to take this as more complicated as you want. You can make as nice of a car as you want. I'm just wanting to introduce you to the idea of what we call sub-objects, okay? Or components. Some programs refer to them as that. So let's go ahead and create a sphere. I'm just going to show you a sphere really quickly. You don't have to. You can just kind of watch this if you want. But if I create a sphere, right, we've already learned that I can move this sphere, I can scale it, I can rotate it, I can do so many different things to try to turn this into something that looks different than a sphere, right? And although I can get a really nice disc or plate or something like that, it's really hard to turn that sphere into a car just by scaling it and moving it around, right? In fact, I would probably say it's impossible. Because it's always in that formation of edges, right, or shapes. So we get this sphere, but I want you to recognize that how we're editing it right now is we're editing the whole object. And if you look at the object, you can see that it's made up of a whole bunch of smaller objects, right? So we have like these little boxes all over it, right? Those boxes are sort of made up of lines, and everywhere that those lines meet, there's an intersection, right? Sounds like I'm teaching kindergarten here, right? When 2 lines cross. All of these things are important because we can edit all 3 of those things, right? So I want to show you how to edit this on the sub-object level. If you go ahead and hit W, so we're in the move tool. If I right-click, and on this object, we're going to get this little marking menu that comes up here, okay? So some of the things you'll notice, vertex, edge, and face, okay? We'll talk about what some of these other things are later, but first let's start with a vertex, okay? A vertex is just a point in Maya. The plural of this is vertices. So if I'm selecting more than one vertex, I'm selecting vertices. But if I select one of these and hit W or whatever move tool you want, right, I can move this around and start changing this object's shape, right? And now it has horns. Right? Now I want you to realize that what I'm moving here is sort of a theoretical point that occurs when any 2 lines cross, right? So, kind of some mathematical theory, some concepts here, right? If I have a invisible point over here and I have another invisible point over here, what is the shortest, most direct way to connect those 2 points? Straight line, right? Not any sort of wavy line, a straight line between those 2, right? And that's what you'll see that each of these vertices are connected by, with a straight line. In Maya, we call those edges. So if you right click and go to edge, you'll see that I can highlight these edges. Grab this one, and I can move those too, right? I can also, again, I can scale these edges too, and I can rotate these edges. A little trick here is if I double click one of those edges, it'll select that entire ring of edges that goes around the object. Okay, this is called an edge loop. And I can scale that edge loop, and I can do this all the way down through here, right?
Yeah. It's like one of those like shampoo baby eye protectors.
I gotcha. I know what you're talking about. So this is where modeling becomes hard because there's not a rocket ship button, right? There's not a turtle button that you can click and make a turtle. But what you can do is you can make these shapes and we can start editing them to turn them into other more complicated shapes. Now, this isn't the extent of modeling, just moving these edges. We can generate more edges. We can connect edges together. We can grab multiple models. We can do a whole bunch of different stuff. Yes?
What did you hit to select the whole ring around it?
If you just double click on any edge, it'll select and if you double click here, it'll select like that. And like this causes you to start thinking about how things work. Do we want to give this thing a mohawk? We can, right? Now, if we have an enclosed area, let's say we were going to fence in a cow or something like that, right? But all we have were perfectly straight 2x4s, right? Perfectly straight pieces of wood, right? What is the minimum number of pieces of wood we would need to make an enclosure for that, to enclose that space? 3, right? Because we could make a triangle out of that, right? 2 of them, we would just be laying 2 boards on top of each other. That doesn't help the cow. We could make the enclosure out of 1,000 pieces of wood, but the smallest number is 3, right? So any enclosed area of edges, any shape of edges, is called a face. Now in Maya, in this object here, most of our faces are squares, right? So if I go to face and click on one of these, you'll see that's one of the faces. And again, I can move this, do all sorts of stuff to it. But you'll notice that the smallest type of face that we can have are these triangles up here, right? In Maya, a face can be 3-sided, 4-sided, 5-sided, 6-sided, 1,000-sided. The only 2 good faces, the only 2 that are going to be clean to use in modeling are 3-sided faces, triangles, and 4-sided faces, quadrangles, right? 5-sided faces, you can use them. I'm not going to give you any issues in this class, but recognize once you get into more complicated modeling, those are kind of bad practice, and there's ways of cleaning that up. And you can make, if you try hard enough, you can make any model out of entirely quads. Quads are the ones that kind of smooth the cleanest. And so that's one of the reasons that that people like to use those more than anything. So if modeling becomes something you're really interested in, that's something you have to keep in mind, but it's not that big of a deal. Like all of that is stuff that just kind of go with the territory. So all of these things we can edit. We can edit the faces, the edges, the vertices, to make these primitive shapes a different shape. Okay, so this is where this is the part where people actually start kind of enjoying this, right? You can make anything in the world you want inside of Maya. You can make photorealistic humans. You can make,
You can make the world.
the world. You can make anything, right? In fact, like every visual effects, incredible thing, Gollum, whatever, all of that stuff was modeled in a program like this, if not this. More than likely it was Maya. Maya is one of the most commonly used. But sometimes you still don't have enough information in here to make the shape that you want. And so there's a whole bunch of modeling tools that allow us to edit these things, right? So if you look up here under Mesh, Edit Mesh, Mesh Tools, All of these are modeling tools to help us edit these faces and edges to be able to change this into something more complicated. So we're going to do sort of a simplified version of a car today just to learn a few of those. So let's go ahead and delete this.
How do you delete it?
I just select it and hit the delete button. So, yeah, I know like it's. I think backspace may do it as well. I'm not for sure. Does it? So, so I'm going to start with a car. When you're going to model something, what is the first thing you should do?
Body.
Huh?
The body. Focus on where you want to put the body.
So focus on where you're going to put the body. What did you say? Foundation. If I have any other ideas you'd chime in?
That's a perfect
Assemble the shapes to make it out of.
It's what we do.
Picture, right? So, I would challenge a few of you who may have a notebook out right now to try to draw a bicycle from memory. Right? You probably saw one today, right? But most people, like it's actually there's studies on this. Only about 10% of people can draw an accurate bicycle frame from memory. Most people can remember there's wheels, they can remember there's a seat, they can remember there's handlebars, and then they get to the frame and they're like, is that like just a stick that the wheels are hooked to? And like, so you can try it right now if you want to. See if you can remember how to draw a bicycle frame from memory. Statistically, it says that only a few of you will get it right, which shows us that our memory is not reliable enough for this stuff. And even if it were, your memory doesn't contain everything in the entire world, right? It doesn't contain all of the inspiration you could get in creating something, right? So if we were to, what I almost always start with is just Googling what it is I'm going to model, right? If you're going to model a KitchenAid mixer, like Google it. Like there's gazillions of pictures out there on the internet of all sorts of things. Let's Google it over here. I'm just going to search car. Sorry, I know you can't see it right now. Just to be safe, I always Google search stuff on the other screen. And so there's tons of different things we're going to get out of this, right? Just from searching car. You may have a very specific type of car you're wanting to model. Maybe you want to, do a like Alfa Romeo. Maybe you want to do a station wagon. I don't know. Maybe you want to do a semi-truck, right? Like Google that. Let's start getting some shapes, right? And so if we looked at something like this, right? This is a pretty interesting shape that we can model. I kind of want to go for a sedan myself of some sort. And so I'm going to look for a nice sedan reference. There we go. Yeah, let's try that guy. Okay. This is the car your mom and dad want you to have. So what this will tell us is some very interesting stuff. It'll tell us just the proportions of the front of the car to the to where the windows start, right? And then the cab, like what's the proportions of that? This one has a really small trunk. These angles, right? All of that stuff is stuff that like we're not going to be able to pull out of our brain. Like it's not in there. Our brain simplifies stuff to save space. So we're going to use this just as reference. Like pull up whatever you want. This is your class to like you can model whatever kind of car you want. I'm going to do something like this. So I'm going to put this over in my other screen here so I can use that as reference. And I'm going to start with a basic form for this car. So what would you start with? Would you start with a sphere? Would you start with a cylinder? I'd probably go with a box, right? Like because there's no car button there, but it's definitely not that donut shape, right? Box is like a pretty good way. Like that's probably how you would start drawing a car, right? You kind of box out the shape, right? And so that's what I'm going to start with. I'm going to create a box. Okay. Now, just for a rough idea in terms of scale, I'm going to temporarily turn my bridge back on here just to get an idea of how big I need it to be. I'm going to go for something maybe like that, and then maybe a little shorter, right? So I just needed to see how much I needed to scale it up. And so this is kind of what I'm getting out of my box, right? Or out of my shape. I know this is still a long way from a car, but this is sort of the basic form, right? So now we just need more detail on here, right? But what you'll notice is this is made up out of like 6 faces, right? This is the simplest, one of the simplest possible shapes you could make. So I need more detail on this thing, right? I actually need more edges in it. And so when we created this box, we had a couple of options. If we went up to Create, Polygon Primitives, and Cube, you see this little square out here on the end? That's the settings for the creation of this box. Right? So if I click that, you'll see that I could add additional divisions in here. All right, so I can turn this up and I can make a box that has, 27 divisions. And when I create that, what you actually see is it's got a lot of edges on it, right? A lot of these vertical edges. But I didn't do that when I created my box. Oh well. So I have to find a way of getting those edges in there again. There's a couple of tools we could use to insert them, but I wanted to show you that node, that process of creating that box, it still exists. So we hear Maya referred to as a node-based software. So there's a bunch of nodes that sort of plugged into each other to generate that box. One of them was the create node, and one of them was the shape node, and the shape node lets us see it on our screen. And then there's a material node that lets it render, right? So if I click this, and I'm still in my channel box, if you scroll down, you'll see that create node still exists. Under inputs, this polycube 2, if I click on those letters there, it will drop down, and I'll have those options to add additional divisions to this object still yet. Okay. Now, if I start making changes to it, if I moved a lot of vertices around, I can still add those, but it may screw it up. So I like doing this as early as possible. So I'm going to go ahead and put a few more edges in here. Right. I'm going to click on subdivision height. We can click out here on the letter or on the numbers and start adding additional divisions that way. Depth, we can click here and add additional divisions this way. So I'm at least going to do three deep, or three long, 2 tall. I'll probably do at least 2 to 5 wide. Let's do 2 wide. But let me show you something else. Like, we can click here on these numbers and change them, or we can click on the word, and over here in the viewport, I can middle click and drag from side to side and add them that way as well. So there's 2 different ways of getting it, but this is what I'm going for, right? Now, once I have this, I need to start looking at my reference to see how I need to sort of space these out. Right? Because I could go in here and grab these faces and move them up, and that's closer, but still not good. Right? What it really boils down to is I need more mesh, right? I need more than just what a box has on it, right? So I need to be able to take some of those faces and sort of make them grow out of it, right? We call that extrude in Maya. So I have those 2 faces selected. Again, to select more than one thing, I click one, hold shift, and click another. This is a toggle select, so it means if I hold shift and click it again, it'll unselect it. But when I have those 2 things selected, I'm going to go to Edit Mesh and Extrude. Right? You'll see the shortcut key for that is Control-E. But if I click that, now I can kind of pull that up out of it. And you see what it's doing is it's growing more polygons out of it. Right? You'll see that I get this extra thing here. It gives us some settings. I can change the offset of it. I can add additional divisions to that extrude. I can make a lot of interesting things happen with this, right? So I'm just going to extrude it a little bit, and then if I hit W, I'm back to the modeling stage, and I can edit that however I want to. Yes?
Can you just go over that one more time?
The extrude part? Yeah. So Control Z, get back to where we were. So I'm going to select one, hold that down, select another one. And so it's Edit Mesh, Extrude, or Control E. And when I do that, you'll see that my locator changes. Now it's like a circle that has a move and it's like it's got all three of them on it at the same time. Yes.
Yeah, how do you select a single cell?
Oh, the face? Let's undo that. So more than likely what you're trying to do is select it and you're like, it's not selecting. We have to right click on it first and go to face. And then you can select individual ones. And then Control E to extrude and just pull that up.
10 out of 10 car.
I broke Maya.
Uh-huh.
I don't. How do you
I'm trying to delete this and it just isn't working.
So we have this, and now we can start making changes to it, right? And this is sort of the practice part of this, where you start grabbing edges, where you start scaling edges, where you start messing around with stuff, faces, to get a different result, right? And we can base that off of our reference, right? Like right now, that's a very boxy looking car. I need to start rounding some stuff off. Maybe one of the things I could do is grab these faces at the top here and sort of scale them inward, right? Like this. I could also probably, this is another thing that's interesting, I can go in here and grab all of these vertices in the middle, right, and scale that outward. Right? So this is where the practice part of this comes in, is just going in here, editing this thing until you can turn it into something that starts to resemble a car to you. Right?
Is that what we're making?
Yes. So whatever kind of car you're wanting to go for.
Sorry, I'm making that face because my thing kept on glitching, so I missed a bunch of steps. I'm going to flash that video.
That's all right. Yeah, I'll have a whole bunch of videos. It's all right. If you feel like you're kind of falling behind a little bit, that's all right. I got plenty of videos for you. I have the videos of class. I'm also going to share some videos I pre-recorded that are not 2 hours long. Like they're more like 30 minutes long.
Oh, cool.
Those are a little easier to follow. I don't cover all of the same material. I cover more of the basics of it, but that might be helpful. But what I would do is spend some time just trying to get interesting shapes out of this. This is, think of this more as practice time again, right? But what we're going to do is just start editing this, right? Like I can go in here and grab these faces and scale it inward, right? To get that angle there, right? Maybe I grab an edge, or these two front edges, and pull that forward to round that. And then I can grab these two faces and pull that forward to start getting a slope on the front of the car, right? All of these things are, I know I'm doing this kind of fast, but all of these things are things that you will eventually start seeing, right? You'll understand like, oh, I need to get that shape, I can do that. Right? So I can raise this up a little bit and get more roundedness there. I can pull this forward, right? Maybe I pull this out a little bit. And I think the hood of my car is still feeling a little short to me. Something like this. And I'm going to scale these two out. Scaling is interesting because if I grab two edges that are on opposite sides of the model and I scale outward, if I hit scale and push them outward, it's going to push them away from each other. All right? And so I'm just going to do that just a little bit to get a bulge there on the front of that car. And maybe the same with this edge to get it to pinch in a little bit. All right? Okay. How many of you feel a little lost? Like, you know, all right, it's all right. That's all right. It's gonna take a little bit of practice in this. I'm going to go ahead and How are we looking at time?
Oh my goodness.
All right. I'm gonna go ahead and not push us all the way through to the end of this. I understand this is pretty overwhelming. Don't sweat it. What I would like you to do is I would like you to come in on Monday with 3 different types of cars modeled. Okay, so I'm going to go relatively simple with mine. Like, if I have this, I can just go ahead and create a cylinder. I can rotate this, let's say 90 degrees there. I can scale it down like this. And so, like, this is the extent of my wheels. Like, I'm not going to go crazy on this, right? But I want you to recognize that there are more things that I can do to this. So, like, I have one set of wheels here. If I hit Control D, that'll actually duplicate these wheels. So Control D. You can use Control C, Control V as well, but it gets pretty messy. So I would use Control D. And so I'm already getting kind of a car shape out of this, right? But you remember earlier when everybody was kind of freaking out about that 1, 2, 3 thing? So if I hit 3 now, my car starts to look a little more organic. Right? And that's why that exists. Yes, now it's a squishy car, right? So this is an interesting feature we have here. Sometimes it gets too squishy though, right? And what that means is I need more detail in this car. I need Maya to be making less of the decisions and me to be making more of the decisions, right? So like the bottom of my car is really like rounded. It looks like a toy underneath it, right? I want the bottom to be a little sharper, right? So I'll show you some other tools for this. So if I go back to 1, right? If I go to, let me turn off my grid so you can see a little better. If I go to Mesh Tools and Insert Edge Loop, you remember when we were double clicking earlier and selecting an edge loop? This will insert an entirely new edge loop. Predicting where that edge loop is going to go can sometimes be a little harder, but if I click here and hold that on that edge, you'll see that it's trying to insert one around there. And if I release that, hit 3, you'll see that now it sharpens the bottom of that a little bit more, right? It's because it's less of an area to round, right? Same for like the roof. I may want to give like a little bit more detail on the roof. So I could do mesh tools, insert edge loop. Maybe I'll add an extra one there, right? See what that looks like. That's maybe not exactly what I was going for. Let's not do that. Control Z. Let's try putting one like right here. There we go. So now that's rounding that off a little bit. Maybe not quite as sporty, but I have more detail here now, so I can start adding things to this. Right? I can grab these, I can round that, I can maybe even scale this in just a little bit more to get the shape that I'm going for.
How do you scale it in?
If you just grab any 2 objects, you can scale from the middle and it's going to make the whole thing bigger. Or you can scale from one axis. So you'll notice how that's rounded. If I scale from here, it's going to kind of flatten it out.
He's angry.
Yeah, he's angry. He's, so I think the thing to recognize is that this is hold on one second here. This is very like not complicated. Like seems overwhelming at first when we look at the idea that we have to try to model a whole car out of a whole bunch of planes, like a bunch of squares. Right? This becomes way easier. Right? If you just search 3D model wireframe, you're going to see what people are able to get out of this, right? And this is why we do this, right? Like that's a little bit more of a complicated car, right? feel free to go nuts. Like, if this is the part you enjoy, that's why you're here.
Ooh, look at those lips. Those luscious lips.
On the car?
No, up the top.
Oh, the next one, yeah. There you go. That's the Rolling Stones album, apparently. So, like, Cars Lips. So there we go. That one's cute.
It's Luigi.
But you'll recognize that all this is a bunch of squares again, right? This is just a wireframe model, right? Okay, I'm going to sort of start ending it there. The thing I want you to do right now, I'm going to ask you this question a lot throughout the semester. I'm going to ask you, did you enjoy that? Was that fun? Like, what did you like that part? Like, what part of this process are you enjoying, right? I'm asking you that for a very particular reason. After this class is over tonight, I think it starts at 7, there's another class that meets in here tonight at 7:15, right? And that class is called Midpoint Review. We've briefly talked about that, but what that class is where you decide what it is you want to do the rest of your time here at ETSU. And that's why these principal classes exist, right? If you get into this and you're like, this is so much fun, I love modeling, right? We have a pathway for that. We can get you through this to where you get a lot of practice modeling, and you get to graduate showing a demo reel or a portfolio in modeling. As you go down to the first floor, there's that big TV, and you see all of those screens displaying stuff. That's the last class you'll take at ETSU. It's called Portfolio, right? And that's what you're working toward, is making that same kind of work. Right? Maybe you don't like the modeling process. That's okay, right? There are there are ways that you can get through the rest of your time here at college and have to do very minimal amount of lighting, right? You don't have to like all of this, right? And that's one of the reasons you're here, is to find out what you do like, what it is you're enjoying, right? And so ask yourself that periodically while you're working on something. Say, am I having fun? Like, is this enjoyable? Am I enjoying this? Because the only way you get good at stuff is by doing it a lot. And if you hate doing it, you're not going to do it a lot, right? That's kind of what this is for. Right now, this part of the process is called modeling. In a little while here, we're going to set this thing up so we can animate it. That's called rigging, right? Animating it, it's animation. That's what I do, right? Lighting and rendering, that's setting it up to where when we put lights into the scene and hit render, it looks beautiful, right? Where we create textures, or where we create materials that seem realistic, right? Or at least appropriate. And like, there's like a whole bunch of other jobs, careers that exist within this, right? We will have sections or days in this class where we just have a conversation about that, where we just talk about what your career possibilities are, what your options are, right? But just keep asking yourself as you're working on this, are you enjoying this? So 3 different cars, we're going to set those up on Monday and we're going to animate them, okay? And then after we animate them, I'm going to give you the sort of the write-up for the Project 1. So really what we're doing is we're working toward Project 1 right now. Project 1 is going to be basically 3 cars driving across a bridge in an environment, right? And so you're going to take this and you're going to texture the bridge, or you can completely remodel the bridge. You can do whatever, and you're going to animate these cars driving across this bridge, or these vehicles driving across this bridge. Maybe a little camera motion, some nice lighting, and that's going to be your first animation. That's going to be Project 1, right? What's due next class period is just a single frame render of your 3 cars, okay? So that gives you a chance to sort of fight with the lighting and the rendering to get an image out, and the modeling process, right? So we'll rig it up and we'll animate it in the next class. So, the videos I'll share this video in just a few minutes, and I'll share some other videos I've made in the past that that go through that entire process all the way up through animation. So that way you'll have that if you want to get a little bit of a head start. If you would like, if you look at my YouTube page, you should be able to go back through and watch how this class went last semester, right? You can pretty much watch exactly what I've done today, except I managed to get all the way through the process last semester. I think it was because it was a 3-hour class instead of a 2-hour class. So feel free to like be brushing up on this. Friday is a lab day, so that means that will be in class time for you to be working on this stuff. I'll be in here. I have a meeting sometime that day, but I don't think it coincides with this class. So I'll come up here. I'll see if you have any issues, and I'll be around to help out with that. But again, I don't take attendance on the lab days. I understand that you're going to work when you're going to work. So the rest of the class is yours to do with as you wish. All right. Yes. Let me stop this video so I can be uploading it. And hey. Oh, thanks. Actually, are you heading out right now? Would you drop the glass office downstairs? Yeah, drop that off with Radina.